Enjoy it, because tomorrow you're getting shipped off to a cheap nursing home. That was the New Year's greeting my daughter-in-law gave me. Right after she tossed a gnawed-on leftover bone into my chipped bowl in front of all her guests. My son sat right there, his head hung low, silent as a statue, letting his wife trample all over his mother's dignity. I was stunned, feeling the blood in my veins freeze from the humiliation. My name is Margaret, and the story I'm about to tell you changed everything I ever knew about family, and just how cruel evil can be when it wears the face of an ordinary person. I still remember that moment, huddled in the most hidden corner of the long banquet table in the very house I had worked so hard to build. Tonight was New Year's Eve, the most sacred time of the year, but for me, it was the peak of loneliness. Outside, a snowstorm was howling, but that bone-chilling cold was nothing compared to the iciness in this magnificent dining room. The savory smell of prime rib, the clinking of crystal glasses, the cheerful chatter of my daughter-in-law's high society friends. It was all a glamorous world I wasn't allowed to touch. In front of me was an old ceramic plate, its edge bearing a large chip that exposed the rough earthenware beneath. It was the same dishware the old gardener used to use. Meanwhile, at the head of the table, Jessica, my daughter-in-law, was radiant in a crimson evening gown with a huge Gucci logo on the chest, holding a crystal glass, basking in praise and compliments. Daniel, my son, sat next to his wife. He held his wine glass, but his eyes were glued to the tabletop, his shoulders hunched, looking shrunken and pitifully cowardly. He didn't even dare to look up at his mother once. Suddenly, the chatter died down. Jessica stood up. She picked up her plate and leisurely walked toward me. The sound of her high heels clacked dryly on the wood floor. She stopped right beside my chair, holding the leftover bone from her prime rib, gnawed on and with only a few fatty strips clinging to it. Every eye in the room turned in our direction. The silence was so complete I could hear the crackling of the fireplace in the corner. Jessica tilted her plate. The bone fell right into my chipped bowl. Dark brown sauce splattered out, staining the pure white tablecloth. I was frozen. The blood in my body felt like it had turned to ice from the humiliation. Jessica looked at me, a cold smile on her face, and said loudly, each word sharp as a knife, cutting into my self-respect. Enjoy it. Because tomorrow you're getting shipped off to a cheap nursing home. Daniel and I need Dad's insurance money to invest in our future. No one can afford to take care of you anymore. That sentence dropped into the middle of the party like a bomb. A cheap nursing home. In this country, that was a death sentence for the elderly. I turned to find Daniel's eyes, hoping for some resistance, or at least a little bit of pity. But there was nothing. Daniel kept his head down, his hand gripping the stem of his wine glass so tightly his knuckles turned white. His silence was the cruelest answer. My son had chosen to side with his wife, not the woman who gave birth to him. I trembled, gripping the plastic fork in my hand, trying to stop the tears of resentment that were welling up. Victorious, Jessica turned away, raising her glass to encourage everyone to continue the party. But just as she brought the glass to her lips, bam! The large front door flew open. Icy wind and snow rushed in, extinguishing the candles on the table. Everyone jumped and turned around. Jessica dropped her glass. The sound of shattering crystal echoed sharply on the stone floor. 3 men entered through the doorway. One wore a sheriff's badge, another was in a suit like a lawyer, and in the middle was a man in a wheelchair, wearing a hat that hid half his face. Though his face was unclear, the man's imposing presence and the aura of menace radiating from him made the entire room hold its breath. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. The cold wind from the open door whipped across my face, making me shiver. That bone-deep chill didn't just come from the New Year's Eve blizzard. It reminded me of the coldness of 6 months ago, the day my world fell apart. 6 months ago, summer in this state was still bright with golden sunshine. But for me, everything went dark on the afternoon the local sheriff knocked on my door. He took off his hat, fidgeting with the brim as he reluctantly delivered the news that Robert, my husband, had been in an accident in Colorado. His favorite Ford pickup truck had gone off a mountain pass, plunged hundreds of meters into a deep ravine, and burst into flames. They said that given the treacherous terrain and the intensity of the explosion, the chances of survival were zero. No intact body was ever found. There was only charred debris and his wedding ring, engraved with my name and his, lying near the scene. After a few weeks of fruitless searching, the case file was closed. The police and the coroner's office concluded it was a traffic accident, and the procedures for a legal declaration of death were carried out quickly. I was completely devastated. I lay in bed for 2 straight weeks, refusing to eat, just hugging the pillow that still smelled of Robert's tobacco and bay rum cologne, and crying. The large house suddenly felt immense and terrifyingly empty. It was at my weakest moment that Jessica began to change. In the early days, my daughter-in-law appeared incredibly caring. She brought chicken soup to my room, sat on the edge of my bed holding my hand, and whispered sweet words of comfort. "Don't worry, Mom," Jessica said, her voice as gentle as a dedicated nurse's. "Daniel and I are here now. We'll take care of everything. You just rest." I believed her. I saw genuine concern in her eyes, or at least, that's what I thought at the time. A week after the funeral, Jessica offered to help me sort out the household affairs. "Mom," she began, flipping through utility bills. "Martha is getting old, she works slowly, and her salary is too high. Now that Dad is gone, we need to cut down on the mansion's operating costs. I'll let her go and handle the housework myself." I nodded, my heart heavy. I knew Martha had worked for us for 15 years, but I was too exhausted to argue. Next came the finances. One evening, Jessica and Daniel brought a thick stack of papers into my study. The dense legal jargon danced before my eyes. "What is this, dear?" I asked, my vision blurred from sedatives. "It's just some asset restructuring paperwork, Mom," Jessica explained quickly, her red-polished finger pointing to the bolded text. "The state's inheritance tax laws are very complicated. If the assets remain in your name, they'll be taxed heavily later on. I have a degree in economics, so I know how to optimize the taxes. Just sign here, transfer the management of the family trust to Daniel. It's safer this way, and it'll be less of a burden for you." I looked at Daniel. My son sat across from me, nodding eagerly. "That's right, Mom. My wife is right. Let us take care of you." At that moment, I was just a widowed old woman, lonely and weak. I trusted my daughter-in-law's economic knowledge. I trusted my son's filial piety, and above all, I believed they were the only family I had left. I picked up the pen and signed. A single shaky signature. I had no idea that the moment the pen touched the paper, I had just signed my own order of exile. The change happened right after that, so fast I couldn't keep up. First was the bedroom. My husband's and my master bedroom was on the 2nd floor, with a large balcony overlooking the rose garden, a place that held all the memories of our 30-year marriage. "Hey, Mom," Jessica said during breakfast, without even looking at me. "Your room is too big, and you're all alone and have trouble sleeping. What if you fall and no one knows? Besides, I need the space for a studio to live stream my online clothing sales. The lighting in that room is the best in the house." And just like that, under the guise of safety for the elderly, I was moved to a small room on the 1st floor, right next to the kitchen and laundry room. It was originally the maid's room. The room was cramped, reeking of fabric softener, with a constant hum of the refrigerator all night. Jessica packed all of Robert's belongings into cardboard boxes and stored them in the damp basement. She took over the master bedroom, turning the most sacred place for my husband and me into an online marketplace. Every night, lying in that cramped room, listening to the sound of Jessica's footsteps stomping overhead, hearing her fake, cheerful voice on the phone closing sales, my heart ached. But I still endured it, I thought. I'm old, it doesn't matter how I live, as long as my children are happy. It wasn't until recent nights, as the pain began to fade a little, that my mind started to clear. During sleepless nights, staring at the low ceiling, an old memory suddenly surfaced, as clear as if it had just happened yesterday. It was the afternoon before Robert left for Colorado. I remembered him standing in the garage, a greasy rag in his hand, frowning at the front wheel of the pickup truck. Robert was very meticulous. He always inspected the vehicle himself before any long trip. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, bringing him a glass of lemonade. Robert shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know, Margaret. The brake pedal feels kind of light. I just tested it, and the travel feels deeper than usual. Maybe you should take it to the repair shop down the street," I suggested. "Yeah, I probably should." Robert nodded. "I'll call a mechanic to take a look. Can't mess around with those mountain passes in Colorado." That day, I saw Jessica lurking around the garage area. She said she was looking for old cardboard boxes to pack her merchandise. At the time, I didn't suspect a thing. I just thought Robert was being overly cautious. But now, lying in this dark room, connecting the dots, the horrific accident, the truck plunging into the ravine, Jessica's swift takeover of the family's management, Daniel's suspicious silence, and Robert's complaint about the problematic break. They were all like pieces of a twisted, terrifying puzzle. A cold suspicion crept into my mind, colder than the blizzard howling outside. Was Robert's death really an accident? The American autumn passed quickly, giving way to the biting winds that heralded winter. Thanksgiving, the most important family holiday of the year, became a cruel farce at our family mansion this time. The smell of roasted turkey, cranberry sauce and pumpkin pie wafted from the kitchen, but the atmosphere in the dining room was as cold as a meat locker. Daniel and Jessica sat across from me. There were no sincere Thanksgiving prayers, only the dry, disjointed clatter of silverware on porcelain plates. In the middle of the meal, Jessica set down her wine glass, gently wiped the corner of her mouth with a napkin, and said casually, as if discussing the weather, "Mom, I've been thinking about Dad's antique watch collection in the study. It's a waste to just let it sit there, and it costs money to maintain. I've contacted Sotheby's. They gave a very high appraisal. We should sell it to restructure the assets." I froze, the piece of turkey, a bitter lump in my throat. That watch collection was Robert's life. Each watch was tied to a milestone in his career, keepsakes he had promised to leave to his future grandchildren. The anger that had been simmering for so long suddenly erupted. I slammed my fork down on the table, the sharp sound making Daniel jump. "No," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Those are your father's mementos. No one is touching them as long as I'm alive." Jessica raised an eyebrow, her expression unchanged. She took a sip of wine, and replied nonchalantly that this was the best economic solution, and she was doing it for the good of the family. This family. I laughed bitterly. This family is my house, my husband's property. You have no right to decide. With that, I shot up from my chair and walked straight to Robert's study. I took out the private key I always wore around my neck, inserted it into the lock, and turned it firmly. The heavy oak door locked tight. I stood in front of it, my back straight, my heart pounding, but my eyes were blazing. For the first time, after months of endurance, I felt alive again. I was protecting my husband's legacy. "This is my house," I yelled as I saw Jessica and Daniel approaching. "As long as my name is on the deed to this house, you won't take a single thing out of here." I expected a fit of rage from Jessica. I expected her to scream, to bang on the door. But she didn't. Jessica stopped a few feet away from me. She wasn't angry at all. Instead, she looked at me with pity, and then she laughed. A soft, light laugh that was crueler than any slap. "Oh, poor Margaret," she clucked her tongue, shaking her head in weary disapproval. "You still don't get it, do you? You're right, as long as your name is on the deed, I have no right. But the problem is, your name isn't on it anymore." I was speechless, my hand still clutching the doorknob. What did you say?" Jessica glanced at Daniel, signaling him with her eyes. My son awkwardly pulled a yellow envelope from his suit pocket and hesitantly held it out to me. I snatched the envelope and tore it open. Inside was a copy of the legal documents I had signed 6 months ago. The words danced before my eyes, but this time, I saw every single one clearly. It wasn't tax paperwork. It was a trust agreement and a deed of transfer for real estate property. I had signed over the entire ownership of this mansion to a trust managed by Daniel. And I, on paper, was now merely a dependent resident with no property rights. My knees gave out. The paper slipped from my hand, fluttering down to the cold floor. "You signed it, remember?" Jessica's voice was steady and sharp. "You signed it because you trusted us. You signed it to optimize taxes. Now this house, this study, and that watch collection, they're all under Daniel's management. And Daniel always listens to me, as you know." I looked at Daniel. He stood there, avoiding my gaze, his head bowed, staring at the tips of his polished leather shoes. He didn't dare say a word to defend this blatant deception. The fierce resistance I had just mustered was mercilessly extinguished. I thought I was holding the key that protected my family, but it turned out I was just holding a useless piece of metal. I had lost everything the moment I put my pen to that stack of papers without reading them, all because I trusted my son. Jessica stepped forward and gently pried my trembling hand from the doorknob. She leaned in close to my ear and whispered, "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom. Don't make things difficult for us anymore. You're old now, just rest." She snatched the keys from my hand, unlocked the study, and walked in like a queen. The door closed in my face, locking me out of my husband's room, out of power, and out of the family itself. I stood alone in the drafty hallway. The shock slowly turned into sheer terror. I hadn't just lost my assets, I had lost the last legal foothold to protect myself. I had become homeless in the very house I built. Before I continue, I truly want to ask you this. Has anyone ever signed papers for their children without reading them carefully, out of absolute trust? Leave a comment so I know I'm not alone. After that terrible Thanksgiving night, I lived in a state of utter shock. But somewhere deep in a mother's heart, I still clung to a faint glimmer of hope, a foolish denial that my son was just a victim. I told myself that Daniel was being manipulated by Jessica, that he was too weak-willed and had been blinded by his cunning wife. I had to wake him up. I had to save my son before it was too late. 3 days later, I found my chance when Jessica drove off to a spa. Daniel was sitting alone in the small living room on the first floor, a half-empty glass of bourbon in his hand. The room reeked of alcohol and cigarette smoke, even though Robert had strictly forbidden smoking in the house. I walked in, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible. I sat down across from my son, looking deep into his eyes, searching for the innocent boy who used to run into my arms during thunderstorms. "Daniel," I said softly, "we need to talk." He didn't look at me. He swirled the glass in his hand, the sound of ice clinking against the sides jarring in the silence. He avoided my gaze like a criminal fleeing judgment. I started gently. I asked him why he tricked me into signing over the house. I asked if he knew how Jessica was treating me, but all I got in return were cold excuses. Daniel sighed, setting the glass down. He said I was old, my memory wasn't good anymore, and I wasn't clear-headed enough to manage such a large estate. He said Jessica had a master's in economics, that she knew how to make profitable investments to secure the family's future, including my retirement funds. He said all of this in a flat, emotionless tone, as if he were reading a financial report instead of talking to his own mother. Disappointment began to creep into my heart. But I wasn't giving up yet. I decided to say what had been weighing on my mind for so many nights. "Daniel, listen to me." My voice dropped, becoming serious. "Your father's death. I think something was wrong. Before he left for Colorado, he told me the brakes had a problem. He said the pedal felt loose. He was going to call a mechanic. I didn't get to finish." Daniel slammed his hand on the table and shot to his feet. His face was flushed, whether from the alcohol or from anger, I couldn't tell. "Stop it, Mom," he snapped, his shout echoing through the small room. "You're starting to get senile again." The police investigated. They concluded it was an accident. An accident! Stop sitting at home alone and making up these wild stories. Dad is gone, just accept it. His aggressive demeanor made me shrink back. He didn't care about the detail of the breaks. He just wanted to shut down my suspicions, to make me be quiet and accept my fate. In that moment, I felt a vague sense of fear. If my own son didn't believe me, who could I turn to? In a state of panic and desperation, my trembling hand fumbled for the phone in my wool jacket pocket. I needed to call Arthur. That's right, Arthur was Robert's best friend, the most reputable lawyer in the area. He would listen to me. He would know what to do with the information about the breaks. I needed to ask Arthur if Robert had ever confided anything similar to him in the past. Just as my finger touched the screen, about to tap on my contacts, a large hand suddenly grabbed it. It was Daniel. He snatched the phone from my hand in a flash. I stared at him, stunned, stammering, "Daniel, what are you doing? Give it back to me." But Daniel didn't give it back. He slipped my phone into his pants pocket, his expression becoming frighteningly calm again. He smoothed down his suit jacket and looked at me with a condescending gaze one might use for a naughty child or a mental patient. "Mom," he said, his voice soft but laced with an undercurrent of threat. "There have been a lot of phone scams targeting the elderly lately. They call and trick old people into transferring money or stealing their personal information. To ensure your financial safety, I'll hold on to your phone for you. If you need to make an emergency call, I'll let you use it. But I need to call Arthur." I protested weakly. Uncle Arthur is very busy. Don't bother him with your paranoid fantasies. Daniel cut me off coldly. Then, he turned his back and walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there, frozen. The door closed behind him, but the sound that echoed in my head was the shattering of my own heart. The moment Daniel snatched my phone and gave that excuse about protecting me from scams, I understood everything. The truth was stark and more painful than any physical wound. My son was not a victim. He wasn't being manipulated. He knew everything. He knew Jessica was cruel, he knew the accident was suspicious, and he chose to ignore it. His silence and compliance weren't weakness, they were complicity. He wanted the money too. He wanted the power too. He took away my only means of communication not to protect me, but to silence me. He wanted to imprison me in solitude, to cut off all my connections to the outside world so I couldn't call for help. I sat huddled on the old sofa, tears streaming down my cheeks. The son I had carried, the son I had sacrificed my youth to raise, had now become my jailer. Nothing could compare to this pain. It was a poisoned dagger, plunged straight into the sacred bond of motherhood. I had lost my husband, lost my home, and now, I had lost my only son to the devil. In the days after the confrontation with Daniel, the mansion, which had once felt so spacious, suddenly shrank, becoming my prison. Jessica wasn't angry, nor did she yell. She chose a more subtle, more vicious form of revenge. She decided to destroy my reputation and isolate me from the outside world. It started with whispers at church on Sunday morning. When I walked into the sanctuary, where I had attended service for the past 30 years, the old friends from the Women's Guild suddenly fell silent. They avoided my gaze. When I approached to greet Mrs. Sarah, my close neighbor, she looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear, then took a step back as if I were contagious. Margaret. She hesitated, clutching her purse. Jessica said you've been very forgetful lately. Do you? Do you remember the way home? Should I call Jessica to come pick you up? I was stunned. It turned out, Jessica had already gotten to everyone first. In the following days, the rumor spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People whispered that I was showing early signs of Alzheimer's disease. That I was paranoid, easily agitated, and couldn't control my behavior. The tipping point came when a short video clip was shared in the neighborhood group chat. It showed me screaming in the living room, flailing my arms and legs, my face distorted with rage. It was a maliciously edited video. The truth was that on that day, I had discovered Jessica throwing away Robert's keepsakes in the trash, and I had panicked and run out to stop her. But in the video, no one saw what Jessica was doing. They only saw a crazed old woman screaming for no reason. It didn't stop there. One morning, Jessica accidentally left a note on the kitchen counter. It was on letterhead from a well-known psychological counseling office in the city, where her best friend worked. On it were cold, professional words. Patient exhibits signs of paranoia, anxiety disorder, and cognitive decline. Close supervision is recommended. I held that piece of paper in my hand, feeling like I was holding a death sentence for my own dignity. She had constructed a perfect script. Now, anything I said, any cry for help I made, would be dismissed by outsiders as the ramblings of a madwoman. And it didn't end there. After the psychological attacks, they began to tighten the physical restraints. The internet in the house was suddenly cut off. The Wi-Fi password was changed. Daniel returned my phone after 3 days of safekeeping, but it was no longer the smartphone that connected me to the world. All the messaging apps and email had been deleted, and it was blocked from making international calls. I could only receive incoming calls, but even the incoming calls brought no joy. A few old friends called to check on me, but instead of listening to what I had to say, they used a pitying tone to placate me. Now, don't you worry your head about things. They'd say. Jessica is so worried about you. She told us you've been suspicious of the family lately. Try to take your medicine and get some rest. I tried to explain over the phone that I wasn't crazy, that they were stealing my house, but on the other end, there was only a weary sigh. That poor woman, her illness has gotten so bad. Complete isolation surrounded me, no one believed me, no one was on my side. Gradually, my self-confidence began to crack. I would sit for hours in the small, shabby room, staring out at the white blanket of snow and start to wonder, what if they were right? What if I really was getting old and senile? What if my memory of the breaks was just something I imagined out of grief? What if Jessica's cruelty was just the strictness necessary to care for a difficult old woman like me? I huddled under the thin blanket, feeling myself sinking into a dark abyss. All around me was darkness. Cold, lonely, desperate. The mansion was thousands of square feet, but there wasn't a single safe place for my soul. I longed to hear Robert's voice. I longed for the feeling of being protected, of being trusted. Robert, where are you? I whispered through my sobs, my tears soaking the pillow. And it was in that silence, when my mind had reached the very bottom of despair, that a spark of memory flashed. It wasn't a hallucination, it was a piece of advice. I remembered a winter evening last year, when my husband and I were sitting by the fireplace drinking tea. Robert had taken my hand, looked at me for a long time, and said in his usual warm, deep voice but with an unusual seriousness, "Margaret," he said, "you never know what life will throw at you. I'm in business, I have my share of enemies. If something ever happens to me, or if you ever feel unsafe, remember the library." The library, honey. That's right. Behind the World History bookshelf, third row from the bottom. There's a secret safe I had installed when we renovated the house. Only you and I know about it. At the time, I just laughed it off, telling him he was always being overly dramatic like in an action movie. But now, those words echoed in my mind, as clear as a rescuing bell. I shot up from the bed, my heart pounding. All the confusion, all the self-doubt, vanished in an instant. Robert wasn't joking. He had prepared for this. In the darkness of my prison room, I began to plan for tomorrow. I would go to the library. I would find the truth. Being misunderstood by strangers is painful, but being slandered by your own family is a million times worse. Have you ever been in a situation where you wanted to explain but no one would listen? If you've ever felt the same way I did, please leave a "me too" in the comments before we continue the story. My chance came the next afternoon, sooner than I expected. Jessica and Daniel had to go out to finalize a contract with an event planning company for the New Year's Eve party. Jessica wanted everything to be perfect to show off her new status to the local elite. I heard the clatter of her high heels on the wood floor, Daniel whining about the car keys, and finally, the roar of the Mercedes engine fading into the distance. The heavy iron gate clanged shut. Silence enveloped the mansion. I stood by the window, peeking through the curtain until the car disappeared behind the old oak trees. My heart began to pound, strong and fast like a war drum. It was now or never. I glided through the hallway, my bare feet silent on the carpet, even though no one else was home. The thrilling anxiety of being a thief in my own house made my palms cold and sweaty. I pushed open the library door. The room still held Robert's familiar scent, old paper, oak wood, and the faint smell of the pipe tobacco he used to sneak. For the past 6 months, I had rarely dared to step in here, afraid the memories would break me. But today, I came here seeking justice. I went straight to the World History bookshelf, just as Robert had instructed. Third row from the bottom, I ran my fingers over the thick spines. War and Peace, a History of Human Civilization. There it was. I pulled out the heavy encyclopedia. Behind it was not a normal wooden wall. I felt around in the left corner and found a tiny latch, no bigger than a pea. A soft click. The wood panel popped open, revealing a small, electronic safe embedded in the wall. My hands trembled as I entered the code. It wasn't my birthday, nor our anniversary. It was the date Robert proposed to me in Paris. The light on the safe turned green. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside, there was no cash, no jewelry. Only a black leather-bound notebook and an old-fashioned flip phone, a disposable prepaid burner phone. I picked up the notebook and flipped to the last few pages. Robert's handwriting appeared, slanted and hurried. June 10th, saw Jessica talking to that mechanic, Miller, at the old garage on the outskirts of town. Why would she go to that rundown place instead of the official dealership for maintenance? The way she looked at him was strange. Something's fishy. June 12th. Miller called me, his voice stammering. He asked about my schedule for the Colorado trip. Said he wanted to check the brake system again just to be sure. I refused since the car was just serviced. But my gut tells me to be careful. I clutched the journal to my chest, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of relief. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't senile. My suspicions were absolutely correct. Robert had suspected it too. My husband knew. He didn't die in a random accident. This was a conspiracy. I put the notebook down and picked up the phone. The battery still had one red bar. I turned it on. The screen lit up with a pale glow. I opened the contacts. There was only one name saved: Arthur. I took a deep breath and pressed the call button. After just 2 rings, the other end picked up. Margaret? The deep, familiar voice of Arthur the lawyer came through. He sounded as if he had been waiting for this call for a long time. Arthur, it's me, my voice broke. I found the safe. Robert. He wrote down. Listen to me calmly, Margaret, Arthur interrupted, his voice urgent but full of authority. We don't have much time. Do not, under any circumstances, sign any more papers, no matter how they pressure you. Stay safe. What do I do? I'm so scared, I whispered, glancing towards the door. 2 days from now, Arthur said, enunciating every word. At exactly 12 o'clock midnight, sneak out the back door, the one that leads to the rose garden. I'll be waiting for you there. I was about to ask another question, but Arthur had already hung up. The endless dial tone buzzed in my ear, but in my heart, a bright flame of hope had just been lit. My intuition told me something miraculous, something I didn't dare to name for fear it would vanish. I quickly put the notebook and phone back in the safe, keeping only a small note from Robert, which I hid in my bra. I closed the safe, replaced the panel, and put the book back in its place. Everything looked untouched. Just as I stepped out of the library, I heard the familiar sound of the car engine at the gate. They were back. I hurried to my room, my heart still feeling like it would leap out of my chest. I sat down in the tattered old armchair, mussed up my hair a bit, let my hands go limp, and stared blankly into space. The door flew open. Jessica walked in, holding a stack of promotional brochures. I'm back, she said, her voice icy. I just picked up some flyers for the Sunset Hill nursing home. The facilities are decent enough, and it fits your current budget. Look them over after dinner. She tossed the papers into my lap. If this had been yesterday, I would have cried, screamed, or begged. But today, I slowly looked up, meeting her gaze with the most vacant, empty expression I could muster. Thank you, Jessica, dear. I said, my voice trembling and weak, a goofy smile on my lips. A nursing home. Oh, that's nice. Will there be someone to cook for me there? I'm so forgetful, I always leave the stove on. Jessica paused for a moment. She squinted, looking at me with suspicion. But seeing my witless, resigned face, the wariness in her eyes faded, replaced by contempt. Good. She sneered. You're finally showing a bit of sense. Behave yourself, and you might just live out your days in peace. She turned and left, slamming the door behind her. The moment her footsteps faded, the goofy smile on my face vanished. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The woman in the reflection had messy gray hair, but her eyes were sharp and blazing, as cold as a razor's edge. Go ahead and laugh, Jessica. Enjoy your victory for 2 more days. Your show is about to end. And my show is just getting started. The next 2 days passed as slowly as centuries. I lived like a shadow in my own home, obediently eating leftover meals, taking my pills on time, and nodding at every one of Jessica's insults. I played the part of a senile old woman so well that sometimes I almost forgot my true purpose. It was the second night since the phone call. The winter wind howled through the window cracks, carrying the freezing cold from the north. Exactly 12 o'clock midnight. The mansion was submerged in a silent darkness. Jessica and Daniel were fast asleep after a long day of preparing for their big party. I tiptoed out of bed, pulling on a thick black coat to blend into the night. I didn't dare wear shoes for fear of making a noise, so I wore thick wool socks, step by step, feeling my way down the back staircase that led to the kitchen. The back door to the rose garden creaked softly as I pushed it open. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. If Jessica woke up now, everything would be over. But there was no one. Only the sound of the wind and rustling dry leaves. I slipped outside. The sub-zero temperature immediately hit my face, but the heat of anticipation inside me numbed the cold. I walked quickly towards the old oak tree at the end of the backyard, where the leafless rose bushes, dormant for the winter, formed strange shapes in the darkness. A figure separated from the gnarled trunk of the tree. Margaret! A hoarse whisper called out. Arthur, I replied, my voice trembling, rushing to grab his arm like a drowning person clinging to a lifeline. Arthur looked much older than the last time I'd seen him. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep, but his gaze was unusually sharp and resolute. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then gripped my shoulders firmly. "Listen to me, Margaret," he said, his breath forming a white cloud in the air. "What I'm about to tell you might be a shock. But you have to stay calm. You can't scream. Promise me." I nodded frantically, swallowing hard. "I promise. Just tell me, Arthur, did he leave any last words?" Arthur shook his head. He squeezed my shoulders tighter. "No, Margaret. Robert didn't leave any last words. Because he's not dead." The world around me seemed to collapse. My ears were ringing, I staggered backward, and would have fallen onto the snow-covered ground if Arthur hadn't caught me. What did you say?" I stammered, unable to believe my own ears. "The police said the truck exploded. They couldn't find a body. It was a miracle," Arthur explained in a low, urgent voice. "On that fateful night in Colorado, Robert felt the brakes fail as soon as he started down the mountain pass. Using his experience, he tried to steer to lessen the impact. Before the truck plunged into the ravine and caught fire, he was thrown from the vehicle and got wedged in a rock crevice halfway down the mountain. Hot tears streamed down my face. Robert was alive. My husband was alive. He was very badly injured," Arthur continued, his voice dropping with pain. "2 broken legs, multiple traumas, and, most seriously, a traumatic brain injury. He was in a coma and had amnesia for 4 months in a small remote hospital under the name John Doe. That's why the police couldn't find him. And why we never heard anything. So, how is he now?" I sobbed. "His memory only started coming back recently," Arthur said. "As soon as he remembered my phone number, he called. I immediately flew out there and secretly moved him to a private nursing facility about a 2-hour drive from here. We were going to tell you right away, but Robert stopped us." "Why?" "Because he wants to catch the whole nest of vipers that tried to kill him." Arthur's eyes grew cold. "Robert didn't believe it was an accident, and he was right. I've hired a private investigator and have been coordinating with the local sheriff, an old friend of Robert's, to reinvestigate from the beginning." Arthur pulled a thick envelope from his coat pocket. He turned on a tiny flashlight, shielding most of the light with his hand so I could see what was inside. "Look, Margaret. We have everything." Under the dim light, the evidence of their crime was laid bare. A bank statement. A money transfer from Jessica's secret account to a man named Miller, the owner of the auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. A grainy black and white photo, extracted from the garage's old security camera. In the photo, Jessica, wearing dark sunglasses, was talking to the mechanic, slipping a thick envelope into his jacket pocket. "We found Miller," Arthur said. "He confessed everything. Jessica bribed him to loosen the brake fluid line. She told him she just wanted to scare Robert a little so he wouldn't drive on long trips anymore, to force him to stay home and retire. The stupid mechanic took the money and did it, never expecting the consequences to be so catastrophic. He's now being held secretly by the police as a witness." I trembled as my hand touched the photos. My daughter-in-law's cruelty went beyond greed. She was a devil in human form. She was willing to gamble with her father-in-law's life just to gain control of his assets. "And this." Arthur pulled out another photo, his voice choked with emotion. "This is Robert now. I took the photo." My heart clenched, the pain so sharp it felt like someone was squeezing it. In the picture was a man in a wheelchair. The familiar face I loved was now a web of raised, jagged scars. The marks left by the sharp rocks of the ravine. A long scar ran from his temple down to his cheekbone, giving his face a fierce look. His hair was completely white. He was so much thinner, but his eyes were staring straight into the camera. They were the same warm brown eyes, but now they burned with a ferocious fire. Those were not the eyes of a crippled old man. They were the eyes of an old, wounded lion preparing for its final pounce. The eyes of judgment. "He wants to make his appearance tomorrow night," Arthur said, putting the photo away and taking my hand. "Right at the New Year's Eve party, Robert wants to unmask Jessica in front of everyone she's trying so hard to impress. He wants her to pay for every single tear you've shed." I nodded, wiping my tears away. The weakness inside me had vanished. Robert had fought off death to come back and protect me. I couldn't let myself fall apart now. What do I need to do, Arthur? I asked, my voice firm. Keep playing your part, Arthur instructed carefully. Let Jessica believe that you've completely given up. Let her be at her most triumphant, her most careless. When she raises her glass to celebrate her victory, that will be the moment we end her ambition. Can you do that? I looked towards the imposing mansion in the darkness, where the villains were sleeping soundly in their victory. I remembered the bowl of leftover bones. I remembered Daniel's sneer. I can do it, I replied, each word solid. For Robert. For this family. Arthur nodded in satisfaction, then quickly melted back into the shadows, disappearing as if he had never been there. I went back to the house. Each step on the cold snow now felt steadier than ever before. I was no longer a lonely old woman, I was Robert Vance's wife. And tomorrow, we would take back everything that belonged to us. I got into bed, pulled the covers up, but I didn't sleep. I lay there, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, picturing the main doors flying open tomorrow night. I looked forward to the moment I would see the look of pure horror on Jessica's face more than anything else in the world. The plan was set. The show was about to end. Now, before we return to the New Year's Eve party to see the wicked get what they deserve, please comment, I'm waiting for the outcome to cheer me on. Cold wind and white snow blasted into the party hall, sending napkins flying from the tables and extinguishing the flickering candles. But the chill from outside was nothing compared to the icy aura emanating from the three men who had just entered. The entire room was dead silent. All activity ceased. A man who had been lifting a piece of lobster to his mouth froze and let the fork drop, clattering dryly onto his plate. Leading the way was Sheriff Anderson, his hand resting casually on the butt of his gun, his stern face scanning the room. To his left was Arthur, the lawyer, carrying his familiar black leather briefcase, his eyes as sharp as a blade as he stared directly at Jessica, and in the middle, the electric wheelchair moved with a slow hum, a soft sound that seemed to echo eerily in the silent space. The man in it wore a gray trench coat with the collar turned up, and a fedora that hid most of his face. The wheelchair rolled straight into the center of the party, crunching over the shards of glass from the wine glass Jessica had just dropped. When the chair stopped directly in front of the main table, facing Jessica, the man slowly raised his thin hands. He deliberately removed the fedora, placing it carefully on his lap. Then, he lifted his head. The light from the crystal chandelier shone directly onto his face. A face crisscrossed with raised, reddish scars, running from his forehead down to his chin. But no one could mistake those deep, commanding brown eyes. Robert? An elderly guest exclaimed, his voice cracking in horror. Jessica was frozen in place. Her eyes were wide, her pupils constricting like a cornered animal's. The color drained from her heavily made-up face, leaving it as white as a sheet of paper. Ah! Jessica screamed. A piercing shriek that tore through the night. She stumbled backward, tripping over the hem of her long evening gown, and collapsed onto the cold floor. She pointed at Robert, her body shaking uncontrollably. No, it can't be. You're dead. You're supposed to be dead. A ghost. It's a ghost. A ghost. Daniel, my son, was cowering by the corner of the bar. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered. His jaw hung open, his teeth chattering, and his legs went so weak he had to grab the edge of the bar to keep from collapsing. Robert paid no mind to the chaos around him. He looked at his daughter-in-law with a terrifyingly calm expression. He didn't shout, he wasn't angry. His composure was his sharpest weapon. "Hello, Jessica." Robert's voice boomed, hoarse and gravelly, a result of his days spent bedridden in the wilderness. "Are you surprised? Or just disappointed that I'm not dead?" He bent down and lifted a thick file folder from the side of his wheelchair. He threw it forcefully onto the middle of the feast-laden table. The folder burst open. Close-up photos of a severed brake line slid across the polished wood. Bank statements with highlighted money transfers. A black USB flash drive landed right next to a platter of lobster. The guests began to whisper and murmur. They leaned forward, curiously peering at the evidence spread across the table. Robert pointed at the documents, his voice hardening. "This is your alibi, isn't it? Too bad, I have different evidence. On this flash drive is the security camera footage from the mechanic Miller's garage, and a recording of his confession. He told us everything, Jessica. About how you came to him, how you gave him the money, and what you told him to do to my brakes. Jessica stammered, shaking her head wildly. No, Dad. Let me explain. It's a misunderstanding. Enough. Robert roared, the sound making the whole room jump. Did you think I didn't know you went through my studies 6 months ago? You found my life insurance policy, didn't you? Robert pushed himself up on the arms of his wheelchair, leaning forward. He stared into the black heart of his daughter-in-law. A $5 million policy. A very tempting number for someone as greedy as you. You calculated that if I died in an accident, the money would be paid out immediately. You were afraid that if I lived too long, the money would be spent, or that I would change the beneficiary. So, you decided to act first. The whole room gasped. The looks of admiration that had been directed at Jessica now turned to disgust and fear. People began to back away from her as if she had the plague. Robert gave a bitter, lopsided smile on his scarred face. You wanted me dead for $5 million in insurance money. Too bad. I came back to take it all. At that moment, Margaret, slowly rose from my chair in the hidden corner. I was no longer shaking. I straightened my old wool cardigan, held my head high, and walked slowly toward my husband. I walked through the crowd, which parted to let me pass. I came to stand beside Robert's wheelchair and placed my hand on his shoulder. His hand immediately covered mine, squeezing it gently. The warmth from his hand flowed into me, confirming that this was real, that we were standing together. Mom. Daniel uttered from the corner of the room, his voice weak. You knew about this, didn't you? I turned to look at my son, my gaze as cold as ice. Yes, Daniel, I said, my voice calm but carrying immense weight. I knew everything. I knew your wife is a murderer, and I know you are a coward who covered for her. You thought I was old, that I was confused? No. I was just waiting for this moment to see your true faces. Jessica was still on the floor, tears and snot smearing her expensive makeup. She looked at me, then at Robert, then at Sheriff Anderson, who was approaching with a pair of glittering handcuffs. The arrogance and haughtiness of the lady of the manor had completely vanished. Now, before us was just a pathetic criminal facing the sentence of a lifetime. Robert patted the back of my hand, then turned to the sheriff. Anderson, do your job. The sheriff nodded and took out the cuffs. The cold, metallic click echoed, sharp and decisive, cutting through the suffocating atmosphere of the party. Sheriff Anderson snapped the shiny handcuffs around Jessica's manicured wrists. He recited the Miranda rights in a loud, authoritative voice that filled the vast room, drowning out the jazz music that had long since faded. Jessica Vance. You are under arrest for attempted first-degree murder and insurance fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Jessica struggled violently. Her face twisted, makeup streaking with tears to form ugly black lines down her cheeks. She no longer possessed her usual elegance and grace. Now, she was like a wild animal caught in a trap, both frantic and ferocious. Let me go! You have no right to arrest me! She shrieked, yanking her hands. But the more she struggled, the tighter the cuffs bit into her slender wrists. This is my house. I'm the owner of this house. Daniel. Do something. Why are you just standing there? Call a lawyer. Call one for me right now. But Daniel didn't move. My son was pressed into the corner of the bar, his face drained of all color. He watched in terror as his wife was escorted away by 2 officers, his eyes wide with horror. He was trying to make himself as small as possible, hoping that in the chaos, everyone would forget he existed. But justice misses no one. After handing Jessica off to his subordinate, Sheriff Anderson turned around. He walked slowly toward the bar, the sound of his boots on the wood floor like the steady beat of a judge's gavel. He stopped right in front of Daniel. And you too, Daniel Vance, he said, his voice low but firm. You're also under arrest for concealing a felony and for being an accomplice to conspiracy to commit fraud. No. Daniel cried out, his voice cracking. I didn't do anything. I didn't know anything. It was all her. Jessica did it. I was just listening to my wife. I'm innocent. You can explain that to the judge. Anderson replied coldly, then signaled for another officer to approach. When the second pair of handcuffs appeared, Daniel panicked completely. He dodged past the officer and scrambled toward me and Robert like a naughty child afraid of being punished. He dropped to his knees right at my feet. "Mom! Mom! Save me!" Daniel clutched my legs, his tears and snot smearing my old slacks. "Tell them, Mom. You know me. I'm your son. You know how gentle I am. Jessica tricked me. She forced me to sign the papers. She threatened me. I was just scared of her, that's why I kept quiet, Mom." I stood as still as a statue. Looking down at my only son kneeling at my feet, I didn't feel the pity I thought I would. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness. Around us, the guests, his and his wife's high society friends, were whispering amongst themselves. Scornful glances, disapproving shakes of the head, cell phones raised to record the scene. Daniel, who had always been so proud of his honor and image, was now casting aside all self-respect to beg for pity. Robert sat in his wheelchair beside me. He said nothing, just turned his head away. I knew he was heartbroken. No father wants to witness such a scene, but he respected my right to decide. Because the one who had been hurt the most in all this was me. "Mom! Don't be silent like that." Daniel shook my leg desperately, his voice broken with sobs. "Tell them to let me go. I promise I'll be good. I'll take care of you. I'll get the house back for you. Mom." I took a deep breath. The icy night air filled my lungs, making my mind clearer than ever. The memories flooded back. I remembered his cold eyes when he snatched the phone from my hand the day I tried to call Arthur. I remembered his blatant lie. "I'll hold the phone for you so you don't get scammed." I remembered his silence when Jessica threw the leftover bone into my bowl. He said he didn't know anything. No. He knew. He knew very well. When he cut off my line of communication, he had cut off his own parents' chance of survival. He didn't hold the knife that stabbed us, but he was the one who held my hands down so Jessica could do the stabbing. Weakness, when it condones evil, becomes an evil of its own. I slowly bent down. Daniel looked up at me, a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes. He thought I would soften. He thought I would once again be the forgiving Margaret, the mother who always opened her arms to shelter him from his mistakes, just like when he was a boy. But the me of the past had died the night he stole my phone. I looked my son straight in the eye, my voice slow and clear, each word loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Daniel, you say you were tricked? No. You weren't tricked. You were just blinded by greed. You silently watched your wife torment me, not because you were afraid of her, but because you wanted the money too. You wanted me to wither away in a nursing home so you could be free of the burden." "Mom!" Daniel was stunned, his grip on my leg loosening. "You're a grown man now, Daniel," I continued, my voice hardening, without a trace of a tremor. "A grown man has to take responsibility for his actions. I've protected you your whole life, but I can't protect you from the law, and I certainly can't protect you from your own conscience." With that, I coldly pulled my leg out of his grasp. That decisive action was like a final cut, severing the maternal bond that was already so fragile. Daniel fell forward onto the floor, his hands grasping at the empty air, with nothing left to hold on to. The officer stepped forward, yanked Daniel to his feet, and twisted his arms behind his back. "Let's go." "No, Mom, Dad." Daniel cried out desperately as he was dragged away, the cries of a child who refused to grow up, a coward who, even at the very end, couldn't face the truth. Near the doorway, Jessica was also being escorted to a car. She wasn't crying or begging for sympathy like her husband. Even facing prison, the only thing she cared about was money. "The money in the Swiss account is mine," she screamed, struggling frantically, turning her head to glare at Robert. "You can't touch it. I earned that. I took care of this house. Let me go. I have to call my bank. You can't freeze my assets." Her screams about money mingled with Daniel's pathetic sobs, creating a tragicomic symphony of greed and depravity. The great doors closed behind them. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cars swept through the windows, dancing on the ceiling before fading away, followed by the sound of sirens disappearing into the snowy night. The room fell completely silent. The guests stood there, stunned, no one daring to speak. The splendid New Year's Eve party had turned into a crime scene, exposing the darkest corners of a prestigious family. I stood there, next to my husband's wheelchair. My legs still felt damp from Daniel's tears. My heart ached. It was a tight, dull, deep pain. No mother feels triumphant when her child goes to prison, no matter how guilty he is. But I didn't have any regrets. I looked down at my own hand, the hand that had foolishly signed those power of attorney papers, the hand that had trembled as it held a chipped bowl. Now, I clasped Robert's thin, calloused hand. Robert looked up at me, his eyes filled with understanding and sorrow. He knew how high a price I had just paid. He squeezed my hand gently, a gesture that was worth 1,000 words of comfort. "You did the right thing, Margaret," he whispered. "You were very brave." I took a deep breath, swallowing my tears. He was right. I wasn't being cruel. I was just teaching my son his final lesson, one he should have learned long ago. Every choice has a price. And the price for betraying your family is loneliness behind bars. Tonight, the blizzard still raged outside, but the storm in my heart, after so many turbulent days, was finally beginning to calm. A year has passed since that day. I'm sitting on my old oak rocking chair, out on the porch of our new home. Before me are no longer the high concrete walls or the cold iron gates of the old Vance mansion. Instead, there's a vast meadow, turning a lovely shade of gold in the late afternoon sun of rural Tennessee. A gentle breeze makes the tall grass sway, creating soft waves that stretch all the way to the horizon. In my hand is a glass of iced sweet tea, a staple of the American South, cool and refreshing. The ice cubes clink against the glass, mingling with the chirping of crickets in the grass. It's a kind of peace I never felt while living amidst all that cold, luxurious silk. We sold the mansion. Right after the trial ended, Robert and I decided we couldn't live another day in that house. It held too many painful memories. Every corner of the staircase, every piece of furniture, and especially that grand dining room haunted me with the image of a bowl of leftover bones and the emotionless eyes of my son. We sold it to a young tech couple moving from Silicon Valley. They moved in happily, and we walked out with a sense of relief, leaving behind a gilded past filled with betrayal. We didn't use the money from the sale and the lawsuit settlement to travel the world or go on lavish shopping sprees. Robert and I used most of it to establish the Vance Foundation for the Protection of Elder Rights. Our office is small, located in the next town over. But every day, we receive dozens of calls. There are elderly people being pressured by their children to sign over property, people being neglected in substandard nursing homes, and people just like me, isolated and psychologically manipulated by their own relatives. We hire lawyers, provide legal counseling, and help them regain control of their lives. I've found joy in this work. Every time I help a mother keep her house, or help a father regain access to his bank account, I feel the wound in my own heart heal a little more. I've realized that the value of old age isn't about being surrounded by children and grandchildren, but in still being useful to the community and still having the ability to be the master of your own destiny. "What are you thinking about, Margaret?" The sound of slow footsteps echoed on the wooden porch. Robert came out, leaning on a cane made of ebony. The scars on his face have faded over time, but they remain, like medals on a soldier returned from the dead. He still walks with a slight limp from the injury to his leg, but his back is straight and strong. He placed a basket of ripe red tomatoes he had just picked from the garden on the table. Once a formidable businessman, Robert now finds joy among his vegetable patches and rose bushes. "I was just thinking about this quiet." I smiled, reaching for his rough hand. I used to be so afraid that without the kids around, the house would feel lonely. But now I understand that the quiet of freedom is completely different from the silence of loneliness. Robert sat down in the chair next to me, and took a sip of tea. He gazed out at the sun, which was glowing like a dying ember in the west. As for Daniel and Jessica, Jessica received a 15-year prison sentence for attempted murder, fraud, and insurance scams. On the day of her sentencing, she was still screaming and cursing at the judge, blaming her circumstances, showing not a single word of remorse. And Daniel, my son, was sentenced to 2 years of probation and 3 years of parole for concealing a crime, with mitigating factors of being manipulated by his wife and providing a full confession afterward. But the sentence from his own conscience is the heaviest of all. After the trial, Daniel tried to see me. He waited outside the courthouse, looking gaunt, with deep, dark circles under his eyes. He wanted to apologize. But I walked right past him. I didn't look back, not because I hated him but because I needed to let him grow up on his own. My coddling in the past had created a weak man. Perhaps my coldness now would be the final lesson he needed to learn how to stand on his own 2 feet. Maybe someday, in the distant future, we'll talk again. But not now. The evening breeze grew stronger, carrying the chill of late autumn. Robert reached over and draped a thin blanket over both our legs. "We're old, aren't we, Margaret?" he said softly. I squeezed his hand, resting my head on the shoulder of the man who had weathered the storm with me. "We are old, Robert. My hair is white, and your leg aches when the weather turns. But you know what?" I looked into his eyes, which were as warm as the day we first met 40 years ago. "It's never too late to start over. Even if we don't have our children by our side, as long as we have each other, and our dignity." The sun finally dipped below the mountains, leaving the last brilliant streaks of light across the sky. Tomorrow, the sun will rise again. A new day will begin, with no deception, no schemes, just the peace that we had to fight for with our own blood and tears. Before I end my story, I want to share something from the bottom of my heart with all of you who are listening. These aren't empty platitudes, but lessons forged from the pain of a mother and a wife who once stood at the edge of an abyss. First, to all the parents out there, never confuse sacrifice with foolishness. I know, a mother's instinct is to give her children everything. But please remember, the money in your pocket and the name on your property deed are your self-respect in old age. Never rush to sign over your only home to your children while you are still living in it. Never hand over your entire retirement savings for them to invest based on a simple promise to take care of you forever. When you no longer have financial control, you lose your voice. Loving your children unconditionally does not mean enabling their unreasonable demands or handing the keys to the fox. Learn to set firm boundaries. Learn to say no, when necessary. Because protecting yourself isn't selfish. It's the only way to force your children to maintain respect for you. Love your children, but don't forget to love yourself first. Second, to the children who are caught between their parents and their partners. Your silence in the face of your partner's wrongdoing is not keeping the peace. It's a fatal stab to your parents' hearts. Balancing your life means building your own family, but it absolutely does not mean allowing your partner to trample on your family of origin, the people who brought you into this world. If your husband or wife shows disrespect, greed, or schemes against your parents, speak up immediately. Don't be like Daniel. Don't bow your head, don't look away. Don't wait until your parents turn their backs on you or are gone to realize. You can find another partner, you can remarry, but you can never find the people who gave birth to you again. Late regret is the most painful life sentence. Third, a word about greed. Greed can make people see their loved ones as obstacles, turning a warm family dinner into a cold banquet of calculations. For money, Jessica was willing to sell her conscience, to even attempt to take her father-in-law's life. But as you can see, money earned from the tears and blood of others will always burn the hands that hold it, and will sooner or later incinerate the holder. Ill-gotten wealth may come as quickly as the wind, but it will blow away all family bonds and leave you in permanent solitude in a prison cell. Don't let money control your soul. And finally, to the young people searching for a life partner, pay very close attention to how your significant other treats their parents and your parents. That is the most accurate reflection of your own future when you are old. A person who doesn't respect their elders, who schemes for their in-laws' assets, will never be a decent life partner. Never enter a new family with the mindset of a gold digger or a divider. A marriage built on a foundation of disrespect for the older generation is like a tree without roots. It will inevitably fall in a storm. Remember, the greatest inheritance you receive from marriage is love, companionship, and family values, not the balance in your in-laws' safe. Darkness has fallen over the farm, but inside our little house, a warm yellow light has been turned on. I stand up and help Robert inside. Tomorrow, we have a lot of work to do at the foundation. Life goes on, and I have finally found the dawn of my own. Thank you for listening to my story. The story you just heard has had its names and locations changed to protect the identities of those involved. We're not sharing this to judge anyone, but in the hope that someone out there will pause and reflect. How many mothers are silently suffering in their own homes? Honestly, I wonder. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you stay quiet to keep the peace, or would you speak up and fight to reclaim your voice? I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this story from my channel, or any feedback you have that could help us make our content even better. God always blesses the brave, and I truly believe courage leads us toward better days. For now, I'm leaving 2 of the most loved stories from our channel on the end screen. I think they'll surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this very moment. If this story touched your heart, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, And turn on the notification bell so you won't miss what's coming next.